Hello and welcome. My name is Michal Mochocki, and I'm going to talk about roleplay as a heritage practice. What do I have to do with heritage? Well, I wear a few hats. Primarily, I am a boring academic scholar who delves into theories, but I'm also a practitioner. So I spent a few years of intense involvement in historical reenactment, including collaboration with museums. I designed and animated non-digital role-playing games, both tabletop RPGs and LARP. And for the last 2 years, I've been a historical consultant and a writer for video games. And third, in order of importance, I'm also an historical educator. I'm used to using role-plays and reenactment, living history lessons in informal education. So I wanted to get inspiration from a fake quote from Sigmund Freud when he was super excited about having run a lecture with no preparation, just animated by cocaine. But since I don't have a cocaine at hand, I had no other choice but to prepare for the lecture. Let's see how I did. I believe you are most interested in getting new methods and new tools for the design of experiences, heritage experiences for museums. This is why we begin with experiential modules. It's taken from Schmidt's book on experiential marketing. So Schmidt recommends the design of services and products so they activate as many what he calls strategic experiential modules as possible. It's about the basic dimension of human experience, 5 dimensions, which Schmidt operationalizes through words. So people can engage with products and services through acting, like doing physical action, feeling, that's emotions, relating, when people realize, form, reconstruct relationships with other people, with groups, communities, also ideologies, ideas. Also thinking, there is cognitive processing and basic sensory perception. Some products, some marketing campaigns engage only one of the SEMs. Some of them combine 2 or 3, and the ideal is holistic design when you stimulate people through all 5 dimensions. You can see a 1-minute video from Pogi Bonzi Archeodrome in Italy. Try to apply these 5 verbs: act, think, feel, sense, relate to the experience offered at this site. There is an academic paper on Pogi Bonzi Archeodrome explaining the 5 dimensions from Schmidt and how they are actualized in this experience. So thinking. Visitors are critically engaged by thinking, questioning, and learning about history. This process also involves scholars. Sensing, albeit in the absence of real artifacts, which are fragmentary or presented elsewhere, visitors can touch the past, reconstructions made from the same materials used in the Carolingian age, and they can smell or taste medieval food during historical tastings and dinners. Act, Visitors act and interact with historical characters during their visit, asking questions and sharing their knowledge. Feeling. Visitors participate in different situations from everyday life in a Carolinian village, for example, funerals or marriages. Relate. Visitors relate to historical characters and other visitors during and after the visit, for example, through social networks. And that's a holistic design of a heritage site. Now, let's now take a step from 5 dimensions of human experience, which are not necessarily heritage focused, to dimensions of authenticity. That's a different scholar, a different academic discipline. So we jump from experiential marketing to tourism studies. Tourism includes cultural tourism to heritage sites. So whatever is built for tourism is likely to work also in heritage. Heritage is part of tourism. Ning Wang came up with the distinction of 5 types of authenticity people can experience. And originally, he talked about existential, constructive, and objective authenticities as competing options. I use his theory revisited by Matos and Barbosa, who claim that it works much better if we apply the theory of complexity and see all these 5 options as possible layers of the same experience. So just like in Schmidt, some experiences can focus on only 1 dimension, 2, 3. They can also engage all 5. So what are the 5 dimensions of authenticity? The group of existential authenticities is based on activity. People doing things at heritage sites, or people doing things with heritage even at home, or people doing things with heritage while on tourist trips. A part of it is bodily feelings. When you are involved in activities on site, you get a sense of authenticity from direct bodily input. For example, if you're riding a horse, if you are sitting by a campfire, if you are learning how to shoot a crossbow, then you get the sense of authenticity of this action through direct embodiment. Self-making is philosophical on the opposite end of the spectrum. Self-making feels authentic if what you do, what you are exposed to, resonates with your true self. Then you can feel your own identity like being reaffirmed by what you do. Interpersonal authenticity happens on 2 levels. First of all, you get a feedback loop from other people at the heritage site. If you are coming as a member of a group, you are participating in the heritage experience with other people, and they are also engaged, then their sense of authenticity affects yours and vice versa. It's like a feedback loop between the participants. The second dimension is interpersonal authenticity felt through a sense of communitas. It doesn't have to be people directly around you. You may also feel connected to your ethnic group, religious group, to your national citizenship through being exposed to heritage messages. So interpersonal is both on the level of immediate participation and on the level of this imagined sense of community with large groups. Constructive authenticity is object-based, not based on your physical bodily activity, but on the object. You're looking at an artifact, you're looking at a historic site, you are looking at a folklore tradition being performed for tourists, and you subjectively judge it as authentic or inauthentic based on what you already know about this period. To historians and professionals, this means judgment of historical accuracy. When you have the competence to compare the heritage performance or the heritage object to historical documents, This is what you base your subjective judgments of authenticity on. If you are a non-professional, you have some vague understanding of what life in the Middle Ages was like. How do you get this knowledge? Mostly from popular culture, from costume dramas, from what you remember or misremember from school history textbooks. If something feels right in your sense of authenticity, you judge it as authentic. So it's extremely subjective. By contrast, we also have objective authenticity, which is simply the authentic origin of the object in the past. So artifacts that were actually created in the past and survived to our time, and they are this material remnant of the past in the present, have objective authenticity. These 5 dimensions can be mapped with, or can be aligned with strategic experiential modules. Not ideally. If you look at the first 3, then they have a pretty self-evident connections. Bodily feelings based on performed activity resonates or aligns with act. Self-making, in some feeling right about your true self, resonating with your philosophical sense of being, is in the realm of feelings. Interpersonal experience of authenticity with people with you on site and with your generally imagined larger communities is about relating. Only the last 2, thinking and sensing, have to be combined to account for constructive or objective authenticity. And these are a variant. If you decide that something is objective, how can you decide? Mostly on the basis of knowledge. If you get reliable information from experts who somehow authorize the information that this is an authentic artifact, not a replica, not a copy, an authentic original from the past, then your experience of this authenticity happens through sensing. You look at the artifact, and thinking. You have to apply this information you have about its objective authenticity to the object. So these 2 cannot be separated. Thinking and sensing work together in the experience of objective authenticity. And the same goes for constructive. If you don't have information that this is objectively authentic thing, you can only judge it as authentic by comparing to your already established criteria for authenticity. And again, it works through being exposed to the artifact or cultural activity. You have to see, touch, hear it. And while seeing, touching, hearing, you compare it to what you know, what you expect to be authentic for the period and setting. So these models do not align identically, they do not align perfectly well, but nonetheless, there is a great degree of correlation between the 2. Let's see what it looks like in battle reenactment. So now we are going to apply these theories to particular genres of heritage performances. I guess we all know what a battle reenactment look like, so I won't be playing any video on that. If you are this costumed soldier on the battlefield, you experience the authenticity of the battle, the authenticity of your gear through the actual performance of marching, loading, sparring. You know it won't be authentic in actual combat because you're not dealing wounds, but the marching and the loading and the horse riding and the camping can be decoded as actually authentic representation of what it was like in the past. Feeling, self-making, by participating in battle reenactment, you can confirm your own identity as a reenactor, as a history buff, as an educator, as a person who has a specific political view on the history that is being enacted. Relating is like an extension of this one's identity. Because feeling self-making is about your own true self, who am I? And relating is about extending your own identity to other social groups. So in feeling and self-making, you establish who am I. In relating, you ask, who am I related to? What are the communities that my experience is somehow connected to? And assuming there are no objective artifacts involved in the battlefield, which is a reasonable assumption, you only work with replicas and copies. You can't have objective authenticity, you can only experience constructive authenticity. So in the realm of thinking, it's the judgment of how authentic, how accurate are the replica weapons, the events which take place on the battlefield, and the narrative which is going on around the battle, and combines with sensing. You can only judge the accuracy of material replicas and events when you first see what they are, what they look like. So we can apply this structural framework as an analytical tool. It can also be easily converted to a design tool, how you want to shape the experience so that people can have a particular type of experience. Let's have another short video. This time it's Cantwell Herford from the UK, and it's not a battle reenactment. This is a living history site. It is similar to the Poggibonsi Archaeodrome. However, it's a 200 people event with costumed visitors. Visitors are invited to don a costume and participate in guided activities. There is dancing, there are domestic chores, there are sports, including combat sports, making and eating food, and a lot of domestic chores and entertainments and sports, with museum staff among the visitors, like guiding these activities, providing a significant part of the entertainment, but it is a participatory experience. So when we are watching the video, it's hard to tell which of the people is the visitor, which are museum staff. The next slide will show the same application of the 5-point analytical tool to living history site. And you will be able to see that essentially this provides the same results as battle reenactment. This time distinction, the physically performed activities in battle reenactment was marching and weapon loading and firing and sparring. At living history sites, this would be cooking, dancing, learning to shoot a bow, playing musical instruments. So the nature of activities will be different, but the nature of heritage experience and perceived authenticity works through the same 5 channels: acting, thinking, feeling, sensing, and relating. So we see the same slide one more time with one addition. I also added the 2 bullet points at the end. So thinking and sensing, when we deal with replicas, can only be constructively authentic. Whereas at a living history site, if you invite people to a real castle, and this is an authentic historical castle, not a reconstruction, then in addition to constructive authenticity of everything that's going on, people can feel, people can experience the objective authenticity of the material site. The same goes for interaction or just mere presence or co-presence of museum artifacts. Now let's take the next step from living history and reenactment, which museum professionals are familiar with, to LARP, live action role play. And as I've been informed, we are a mixed group. Some of you already know LARP, some of you haven't had the pleasure of participating in this experience. So I will assume that you don't know what LARP is, and I will try to briefly explain LARP by comparing it to battle reenactment and living history sites. And the first thing I'd like to bear in mind is that a LARP, if we recorded it on video, it could have been Cantwell Hall. LARP might look exactly like a living history site with costumed participants doing different daily chores in loosely scripted events. There are different genres of LARP. I can talk about two LARPs. Combat LARP, which take place outdoors and focuses on fake melee and ranged fighting. It looks like battle reenactment, but it doesn't use metal, steel replica weapons. It uses safe latex swords, safe latex buffer weapons. Usually LARP is not so hard on requirements for historical accuracy, and many LARPs are not historical at all. Many LARPs take place in fantasy settings, but you can make historical LARP as well. Often, in addition to large-scale battles, you have non-combat roleplay in camps, which is like the living history sites. And importantly, LARP introduced game mechanics for violent interactions, for intimate interactions, and also for magic and supernatural events which cannot be physically enacted. They have to be symbolically represented. They use game mechanics. I will speak a little bit about game mechanics a few slides later. But I'd like to focus your attention primarily on so-called chamber LARP that takes place indoors in a constrained space. This can be compared to this living history event at Cantwell Hall, but chamber LARPs is often entirely focused on social interaction. So there won't be any combat, any violence. You just get into characters, you get into the roles of individual people, and you improvise interactions in a loosely scripted scenario. Second point, it is often actively coordinated by a game master and so-called NPCs, non-player characters, which are essentially instructed players who collaborate with game masters to make the best experience for regular players. So NPCs are like staff hired by the game master, although it doesn't have to be hiring for money. It often is just a cultural amateur activity. Also, chamber LARPs use game mechanics for violent, intimate, supernatural action. For example, if characters want to roleplay a sexual intercourse, then there are special rules on how this should be enacted without actual undressing, without making it uncomfortable. It may be just narrated, or a game mechanics for sex may involve simply caressing of the face and neck, or maybe just the caressing of hands. So all rules are pre-established and explained, often trained in pre-game workshops before the game begins. And also, if you are low on budget, this is a great opportunity to design roleplay experiences without the need for costuming or props. You can design this social roleplay with character enactment without costuming. People can come in regular 21st century clothing and just pretend to be in the Middle Ages. So LARP, unlike historical reenactment, is open to symbolic and imaginative representation of the material element. Let's see what the LARP looks like. I hope you can read fast. So I have a few pages from an actual LARP designed by a Belarusian writer on Belarusian history. A question to the organizers: shall I read out the text, or may I just shut up and let you read it from the screen? What do you prefer?
Yeah, sorry. Well, if we have the time, please read.
Okay, so I'll try to read only the important bits. Historical background. This lab is played in the Second World War, when Nazi Germany occupied Belarus and created local police force to collaborate with the Nazis. So this is a game about people who are conscripted or forced to serve in this Nazi supporting local police force. In the game overview, you can read that the game takes about 2 to 2.5 hours. It's designed for 5 to 14 players. It is operated by one game master and one instructed player. So cooperate with the game master in managing the game on the run. The specific setting is a training camp. So players will enter the game as people who have just been captured and brought to a training barrack, and they will be recruited for this Nazi supporting police force. This is what we learn from the game scenario, which is published for game masters. Like, you could take this game, read the instructions, print out the materials and run it at your museum. This page shows you the game mechanics. Mechanics on violence. Physical violence is forbidden. If fighting occurs during the game, it should be role-played like that. The fighting characters should hold each other's wrists and count until 30. And then they drop a coin, heads or tails. Flipping the coin decides who wins, and then it has to be role-played, acted out, which player lost, which player won the fight. And then we read on. The winner decides what to do with the loser. The winner has the right in the game to decide to kill the other person or just wound the other person. And we've got specific rules, more detailed rules on how to enact combat for more than 2 people. There is also a rule for gunfight, because some characters are equipped with plastic guns. But both options, unarmed combat and guns, are regulated in the rules. So players should know how to act within the constraints of the game mechanics. To the left, there is a list of items, a list of props that the game master should prepare before the game. So what do you need to play? 5 to 14 players, 1 game master, 1 instructed player, 2 toy guns, 1 coin for each player, some strips or tape or some other physical tokens to represent bullets, some paper slips with 5, 10, 50, and 100 marks to represent German banknotes, paper and writing utensils, and some food that can be easily distributed, like chocolate, cookies, loaf of bread, plus name badges for the characters. An important rule: moving around the territory. Most of the game happens in a single room, and the players are simply locked in the barracks. If they want to go out, they have to knock on the door and ask the guard to let them out, for example, to go to the toilet. It's at the same time the mechanics of the game and a rule for organizing the game space. So I think now we have a relatively good idea of how the game is supposed to work. Now, please read 2 character sheets. That's an important tool in LARPing, that you write a short biography and personality and goals for the character, and you distribute it among players. Sometimes, maybe even often, players can create their own characters or create them in collaboration with the game master. However, this game is designed for game master distributed characters. As you can see, 2 characters representing regular local population with an important political alignment. Some of them support the Soviet Union. Some of them are opposed to the Soviet Union. Also, each player is equipped with some of the props. These guys have money. Some other people will have a chocolate bar. Some other people will have bullets for weapons. There is a lot of trading that may be going on between the players. What is important in the character design? Ivan or Elena, depending on the gender, player number 2 is against the Soviet Union. Your father was the hero of the revolution, but he was arrested and shot. You were kicked out of the university. Your mother was taken to a concentration camp, and the Germans freed you. And you're an anti-communist, so it makes you probably more friendly towards Nazi Germany as liberators. Player 3 supports the USSR, brought up in a family of communists. You also have a connection to players 4 and 6. If you read the player 3, the paragraph to the right, you have some information on player 6. So this game is also working or playing a lot on interactions between characters. Some characters have secrets. Some other characters know those secrets and can reveal those secrets in the game. So all in all, everyone has something they can trade, and some people have particular relationships, friendship, enmity, familiarity with someone else's secret that can also drive improvised roleplay. But as you can see, there are no guidelines of what to do. In LARP, you enter the starting situation as a character who may have a worldview and specific goals to establish, but you are left alone to improvise. You decide how to go about these things. You will improvise dialogues and interactions with other characters. This is the power of LARP that can get people intensely engaged. The start of the game. Before the game master explains the rules, distributes character sheets, distributes all these props, chocolate bars, bullets, and the money, presents the historical background. And after 10-15 minutes, when player can read the roles, establish relationships, the game begins. The game begins with running. We start running under the command of a Nazi commander to the barracks. And we are led inside the room. And the game master, in the role of the camp commander, starts the first act. After the players have been locked for some time, the first act, the door opens, and the guard, with the commander of the battalion, enter the room. Greet the players, welcome them to alliance with Nazi Germany, and they instruct the players that they will be loyal to Germany. Hence, they will benefit, they will get food, clothing, money, etc. But they have to help the Nazis get rid of the Bolsheviks and the Jews. But after this introduction, the commander leaves players with the task. They need to choose their leader and a second in command for the unit. then the door closes, the players are left alone for like 20-30 minutes to decide who should be their leader. So you can imagine that all the trading and blackmailing and alliance forming will take place. It may succeed in electing a leader or not. It doesn't matter. After 20-30 minutes, the commander comes back and asks, who is the new leader? If there is a new leader, the leader gets some food from the commander. If they haven't elected anyone, the commander just assigns someone at random. You will be the new leader, you will be second in command. And they provide them with new piece of information that they are now being prepared to the first action, which will be a brutal pacification of a village that doesn't want to collaborate with the Nazis. They will be leaving the camp in 30 minutes. They have to get prepared for this dramatic mission. And again, the Nazis leave the room, the door is locked, and the players are left with this instruction message that in 30 minutes they will have to go and help the Nazis pacify the local village. Again, the game doesn't know what they will do, what they will decide. In the third act, the commander enters the room again, furious, and he informs them that he knows there are traitors in the room among them. And before they go to any action, they must establish who the traitors are. They distribute slips of paper and pens and instruct the players that they should write the name of the person or people they suspect of not being loyal to the Nazis. That's the task, and the commander leaves the room. Again, the players are left with this task of whether to rat on some of their colleagues, maybe to refuse to write anything at all, but this will risk a punishment. And then there is a fourth act. I'm not going to tell you all the details because we have no time. Nonetheless, you get the feeling. And this is a game which, as I said, needs no costuming, needs no props in addition to this small set which was listed previously. And yet it can confront players with those tragic dilemmas and risks that people in the past must have faced. Because we are talking about role-playing games now, LARPs is a role-playing game, one of the genres of role-playing games. It opens the whole toolbox of game design and role-play design. So we can see the connection between experiential marketing in act, feel, relate, and think, and authenticities of heritage that are activated if we're playing with heritage material to immersion into roleplay. There are 6 layers of immersion identified by scholars. One of them is immersion in the game rules, how you are focused on getting the highest score, on optimizing your strategies, on competing with other players. We can put this aside because this last immersion into game doesn't have a counterpart in the strategic modules or in the authenticities. But if you put the game rules part aside, we are left with 5 immersions, which again perfectly correlate with the 5 dimensions of act, feel, relate, think, and sense. So my hypothesis is that if we play with historical/heritage material in LARP, that if we use the toolbox of designing for particular layers of immersion, we can also automatically translate this design to heritage authenticity. So this subjective perception of heritage authenticity, which is no more but a theory, but that's a theory I am working with. Because both game immersion and the perception of authenticity go through the same channels of act, feel, relate, think, and sense, well, it's more likely than not that they are correlated. In other words, immersion in a historical role play, in a historical story world, at the same time generates the experience of heritage authenticity. The last thing I want to explain today is the next genre of roleplay, tabletop RPG. And I will try to explain it by comparing it to LARP. So tabletop RPG is in a way similar to LARP in that everyone role plays as a specific character, but in tabletop RPG, we are seated at a table in a small group. So there is no physical movement in space. We are just sitting and talking. There are no costumes, no physical props, no physical performance of action other than role-play dialogue with supporting body language. And all other actions, all actions other than speaking and maybe gesturing are simply declared as narration by each player. So everyone declares what their character does in the story world. And this narration is collectively imagined by co-players and the game master. Now, this game, although there are some experiments with role plays without a game master, but in its classic form, it needs at least one game master who first has prepared the plan, the scenario for the game session. For example, the game master would decide that it will be played by this Belarusian police force forced to collaborate with Nazi Germans. It could be the decision of the game master for the setting, for the scenario, for the starting situation. During the game master describes the environment. So instead of forcing players to enter a room, the game master would tell you that guards are all around you, forcing you to run towards the nearest barracks. And the guards will describe what the barracks looks like, how they are forced into a room with no windows, the door is locked, it is communicated with narration. And everyone has to imagine this narration on the run. Also, the game master will adopt the role of each other character that communicates with the players. If we have 4 players around the room, everyone plays their own single character, but whenever they want to knock on the door and ask for the guard, the game master will first describe that the door opens, and then the game master will adopt the character, the role of the guard, and will speak as the guard with the players. And the last key function of the game master is to control the use of game mechanics, which is usually based on dice rolls versus numerical parameters on a character sheet. Because before the game, players generate characters and record information on a character sheet. Yeah, I need to check the time. I have 15 minutes. You know what? There is a small change in the plan, because somehow I tried to set my audio settings so that you could hear the next video, but it doesn't work. So you can go back to this presentation when we are done and play a demonstration of a tabletop role-playing game session. If you don't know what tabletop RPG looks like, you can see this sample of actual play. I'm not going to play it right now because it has to be heard. Right now, I can only perhaps show you the key role of the game master, who introduces the players, and then players take turns to speak as characters within the situations described by the game master. Sorry, I wanted to play like 2 or 3 minutes, but without the sound, it doesn't work. In summary, it's not the last slide yet, but we are now nearing towards the end of my talk. I described LARP and tabletop RPG as two variants of physically enacted role play. LARP is enacted in full embodiment with costumes and movement in space. Tabletop RPG is restricted to sitting around the table and talking, but nonetheless, improvised dialogue with body language is still physical. You're still enacting the character with the body, although it is limited to enacting the voice and the gesturing. And this all can be compared to well-known genres of heritage experiences, heritage performances, such as historical reenactment, whether in the battle reenactment version or a camp or a living heritage site version. As a museum professional, when you decide what you could be interested in offering, well, you should first of all consider these social and spatial and temporal limitations. If you want to go for tabletop RPG, you can only work with a very small group. One game master can efficiently communicate with maybe 5 players. 6 is problematic. 8, it's been done, but then, well, each player needs separate time and attention from the game master, so it has to be limited. Whereas LARP can be designed for hundreds. A chamber LARP can run with just 2 people. It's also been done, but it's very flexible. You can LARP with 5, 10, 30, hundreds of people. Also, the spatial requirements differ. TRPG is face-to-face around the table. LARP is face-to-face in a shared space with movement. And camp and battle reenactment also take place in a shared space, which is exponentially larger. Temporal limitations also play a role. Tabletop RPG is typically played over multiple sessions. So people create a character for a longer campaign, and they meet with the game master maybe once a week for a longer period of time. A single game session, well, it can be 45 minutes, but it's hardly satisfying, because when people get into the character and want their story to develop, they would rather want to spend a few hours at a time. So in the museum setting, you could have hired game masters in different rooms playing, for example, 2-hour sessions with invited groups. LARP is usually played as one session. It may take a few hours, it may also take days. If it takes days, you can have people sleeping in the game, in character, or going home and coming back for the next day to resume play. And some of you will be invited to the next meeting with me, but the next episode will focus on the design. So today I showed you the different formats of roleplay and their specific features and how they engage with heritage material. Next time, probably in January, we will focus on what we can do with those tools. We'll move from an analytical framework to a design toolkit. So all the 5 dimensions of acts, feel, sense, relate, can be actively designed for. We can actively introduce game features, game design decisions in order to facilitate or emphasize a type of play, which can be configured, of course, depending on your own limitations, your own budget, the features of the venue that you control, The toolbox we're working with includes the stages of processual world building, which means that world building, communication of historical information does not begin in gameplay. It starts with the organizer information, step 1, how you communicate the upcoming game to potential audiences. And actually, for the people who already know a little bit about the historical period, their contact with your historical story world begins at step 0. They have some prior knowledge of the historical setting. But all 4 stages you can see on this page happen before the game begins. Communicating information, preparing people for play, for example, creating characters, and also immediate pre-game briefing on site. Only then does the play begin. It includes gameplay and also out-of-game moments if there are breaks in gameplay. It ends with a debriefing on site and continues to engagement with the audiences long after the game, when they communicate with us and with others on social media. So preparing roleplay experience requires to design the distribution of story world information across these stages. We can also work with lists of specific affordances for particular forms of immersion, /authenticities, /experiential modules. We can do it with tables from my book. For example, table 7.1 is about affordances for immersion into activity. If you want to stimulate this form of engagement with heritage, these are typical tools you can use in your design. For example, daily chores and activities. And as you can see, this table shows the affordances of which affordances are typically present in LARP, in historical reenactment, that's RH, in tabletop RPG, and in SEV. What is SEV? This is what you do, what you typically are involved in: site and event visitation, like a typical museum experience. I've got a separate table with separate affordances for every dimension or every layer of authenticity / experience / immersion. At the end, we can also study the potential effect of our design through registers of museum experience by Smith. It's a different framework. And it's not even in my book, because as you can see, we published our books in the same year. So I had no access to Smith's work when I was writing my book. But now I can see it connects very well. It comes from the book Emotional Heritage, which actually is the last slide I can leave you with today. The last slide is my recommendations. So if you don't have LARP experience, I strongly recommend that you play these videos on different LARPs in museums, so you can play it at a convenient time, which ends with a Live-Werkstatten website. It's not a YouTube video, but it is a website of probably most experienced in Sweden that deals with LARP education, and they have an extensive history of collaboration with museums. So if you are looking for experienced LARP designers for museums in Sweden, this is your go-to place. Live-Werkstatten website and like Live-Werkstatten team. When it comes to books, I recommend Emotional Heritage as the book that helps understand what happens in the visitors' minds and bodies when they visit heritage site. Now, this book is focused on the visitor experience. Museums at Play, Games, Interaction and Learning is a book of case studies. It has like 50 pages of theory and several hundred pages of actual reports from different games, digital and non-digital, organized at different museums. So if you want like a book of cases, that's the best one you can find. And if you want general ideas and motivations and agenda for participatory experiences, go for Nina Simon Participatory Museum. It's pretty old now. It was published in 2010, but nonetheless, it includes both theory, agenda, and a lot of practical tools and advice on how to make museum experience participatory. It's not only about games and role plays, it's also about, for example, designing websites and online activities for visitor engagement. I can recommend my book, which explains this method of combining experiential modules with game immersion, with heritage authenticity across the three genres of tabletop RPG, LARP, and historical reenactment. And last but not least, if you want to look at the toolbox of LARP design, which may or may not be focused on history, then there is a great book, LARP Design, Creating Roleplay Experiences from 2019, which is like a summary of the whole knowledge of the Nordic and American LARP design community over 2 decades. Thank you very much. And I don't know if we have time for questions. If we do, well, I'm ready to take them.